Our story begins in 1851 with the first treaty. At this time, treaties with native nations were used as a tool by the federal government to relocate tribes into smaller and smaller tracts of land.
Those treaties are legally binding per the U.S. Constitution. Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says treaties are the supreme law of the land. So you might be surprised that if those borders had held, our country would look completely different on a map. There would essentially be another country within our borders. The U.S. went on to sign over 300 treaties with native nations. By definition, I believe every single treaty has been broken in some way. I can't think of one that hasn't been violated.
The Second Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 recognized the rich and sacred area of the Black Hills as part of the Lakota tribe's land.
Eventually, when gold was discovered in the Black Hills, settlers went in and started encroaching on native lands.
The U.S. government used violent military force to unlawfully take the Black Hills in violation of their own treaties. This is known as the Massacre at Wounded Knee, which resulted in the death of over 300 innocent men, women, and children of the Lakota tribe. Then, in 1887, the General Allotment Act was placed, which from 1887 to 1937 resulted in the taking of over 90 million acres of indigenous land across America. The Black Hills were part of this, meaning that under U.S. law, the Black Hills are no longer in the hands of the Lakota. The Lakota used this land for their survival, and when it was taken away, they were left with infertile lands that were insufficient for their survival. The Sioux Nation eventually sued the U.S. government over violations of the original treaties of Fort Laramie, asking for the return of the Black Hills.
In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled for the Sioux Nation of Indians, agreeing that yes, their land had been illegally taken. However, rather than give the land back, the government decided to calculate a value of what the land would have been worth at the time and then adjust it for inflation and then pay them for it. And so they gave the Sioux Nation $106 million. And for the federal government's perspective, it was then resolved because they had been compensated.
But the Lakota people do not want the money, right? Because to them, the land is sacred. The land cannot be seen as a property. You can't, because we are really talking about two worldviews here. There is the United States worldview, which looks at the land in terms of property as a private property. But if you look at it from the Native perspective, the land is sacred. Something cannot be sold, right?
Indigenous worship is based on place, meaning that without access to the Black Hills, part of the Lakota culture can simply not be practiced. The Lakota people continue to refuse the monetary compensation for the Black Hills, fighting for the historic claim of their land.
So, the annexation of the Black Hills is something that, shows an example of the way treaties are violated, but also shows the way that American Indian culture continues to be disregarded, in the sense that you are taking the sacred place, you are stealing it from people in violation of your own constitution, and many people are interested to know that Mount Rushmore is carved into the Black Hills. So you have your land stolen, and then you have the faces of the very people who are oppressing you carved into it. I mean, this is someone's Vatican. This is someone's Mecca. And that's the reality of it today.
What are you doing? Your water is under attack!
Stand up, fight back!
We're here to pray. We're just here to pray.
Most recently, the Dakota Access Pipeline was built, endangering the sovereignty of the Lakota. The pipeline runs from North Dakota to Illinois and transports 65,000 barrels of oil per day. Many tribal communities and environmental activists are concerned with the legal and ethical issues with the pipeline because it runs through the Lakota tribe's historical land.
The other concern is that this pipeline actually was crossing their burial grounds, their ancestral lands, and that caused a lot of concern and a lot of anxiety among Native people.
There's also something in federal Indian policy called the Winters Doctrine, which essentially states that any activity that will impact water on a reservation even if that activity happens off the reservation, it still has to be done so in a way that makes sure that it doesn't affect the water on a reservation. At the very minimum, they're at least violating that, because having a pipeline that's only half a mile away, that is most likely to and already has spilled, is of course going to affect their water supply. So there's a number of issues in terms of how this affects people today, how it has violated previous court precedent, and certainly how it's violated treaties that were signed with Native nations.
The space that reservations hold in America today is complicated to say the least. Native nations are defined as domestic dependent nations, meaning that their sovereignty is more than a state, but less than another country. This means that the federal government has control over the lives of the indigenous people.
I believe through my research that it's much more likely that the so-called founding fathers and the framers really did truly in every way, shape, and form view Native nations and the individuals that are part of those nations as truly being citizens of other countries, and like the sovereignty was that of one that matched other countries. It's only over time that somehow attitudes towards Native communities as nations has been eroded. And it's because of that erosion that has been facilitated by law and policy that we see these types of things today.
In 2023, we are still facing the wrongs of the federal government from 200 years ago. Many people don't know how to deal with these issues because of how politically and socially complicated they've become. Socially, everyone can do their part to spread awareness and start conversations about the issue.
Native nations lost their lands. Many of them lost their historical identity. Some of them lost their languages, like the Ohlone Nation of the Bay Area. They continue to fight to reclaim parts of the language. And these are some of the things that, not only the government, but individuals can pitch in and can help in a number of ways.
If the federal government were to own up to the promises they've broken, they must not only give back stolen resources to Native nations and let them be sovereign and thrive like they did before the colonization of their land.
There have been laws that really serve to advance the rights of Indigenous people in reservation settings, and I think many of those rights, the ones that become the most significant, are the ones that, again, are supporting tribal sovereignty. And I think what people are just sort of asking for is the ability to reclaim the tools that they always had in order to manage their own community, which people are perfectly capable of doing. So it's less about giving or helping and more about like staying out of their way and honoring the promises that were made to them. And I really believe that if treaties were honored, that so many of these things would begin to heal themselves because the people themselves know how to do it on their own.
About the taking of the Black Hills, the wishes of the people have been voiced. The Black Hills are not for sale. The president of the Oglala Sioux tribe said, "Our tribes did not want the money, they want the land back." The way the U.S. government has treated Native nations is immoral and unconstitutional. The recent pushback against the Dakota Access Pipeline is a sign that everyone is fed up. Today, the Dakota Access Pipeline continues to be operational, putting the Lakota at risk every day. Giving back the Black Hills would set a precedent for a new era of American history, where the government truly faces the suffering it's caused, and we can finally begin to mend our country's wounds.